Welcome to the Hub Roundtable for the 28th of March. I'm Rudyard Griffiths, the publisher of the Hub. I'm joined by Sean Speer, co-founder and editor-at-large. He also is today the birthday boy. Happy birthday, Sean. Come on. Women aren't allowed to tell their age, but men are. So I want to know what year are you celebrating this year?
Yeah, I'm 43. I think I'm roughly a decade younger than you. Not that I'm counting. But yeah, we were out late last night, as I was saying before we came on, and so I'm feeling all 43 years of my age today.
Well, I don't know. It doesn't trust me. By the time you hit your 50s like me, something happens with alcohol and it's no longer your friend. So Sean, I'd say get it in while you can, because you'll be like me. You'll have like one glass of wine and then you'll be up 3 times in the night and you won't sleep. So that's how pathetic your 50s are, Sean. Well, let's begin as we do every program, just thanking some fantastic fellows that have signed up to support the Hub with a lifetime subscription. So a big thank you to Jane C., David D., Adam B., and Gerald S. We'll talk a little bit in the back half of the show about an op-ed that Sean and I wrote today about the latest penny to drop in the ongoing shame that is large-scale subsidization of news in Canada. So these fellows make it possible for the Hub to be subsidy-free. So we thank you very much for your generous support. Sean, I have to begin our conversation today, though, with the news breaking in the last hour or so around recording. Donald Trump summarizing a call with Mark Carney. We have it on the screen here for our listeners. It says, quote, an extremely productive call. This is the president. We agree on many things, and we'll be meeting immediately after Canada's upcoming election to work on elements of politics, business, and other factors that will end up being great for both the United States of America and Canada. What does Donald Trump know, Sean, that we don't? He seems pretty confident he's going to be meeting with Mark Carney after this general election.
Yeah, 'cause the president, if anything, can read the polls, I guess. He wrote it, Rudyard, because it has random capitalization, which is his signature. Yeah, this is a big development in the race. I think it's fair to say it advantages Mr. Carney. He couldn't have written that post, I think, better if he wrote it himself. He is riding the wave of this perception that he is the best place to advance Canadian interests vis-a-vis the Trump administration. And that post seems to affirm on the part of President Trump that perception is right. In that sense, I think it does have a deflating effect on the Conservative campaign, which, as maybe we'll talk a bit about, I think essentially has no choice but to double down on affordability and cost of living and try to make the case that this election should be about change and not Trump.
Yeah. But Sean, it's just an example of the ridiculous advantage that Carney has had carrying the premiership, the status as a caretaker, but boy, it doesn't feel like caretaker prime minister into this election. I mean, yeah, he's getting a love letter on Truth Social from the president of the United States today in a moment where every poll shows that, the Trump factor is the number one decider in terms of how votes are breaking. So yes, the Conservatives can double down on affordability. Yes, they should. It's one area where the polling that we've been talking about at the Hub all week shows that they have an advantage. But come on, Sean. I mean, this is getting ridiculous. He had a call today with the premiers. He gets to play prime minister at home. Now he gets to play prime minister abroad. I mean, the Conservatives are in like a gunfight with a pocket knife.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we debated a lot, Roger, whether Mark Carney ought to be sworn in as prime minister or go into the election as Liberal Party leader, but not prime minister. Clearly today and the past couple of days has reinforced that his decision to go into the campaign as prime minister, to take that couple of weeks after having won the Liberal leadership as prime minister and then heading into the campaign it was the right choice. As you say, can only be one prime minister, and in moments like these, everyone else looks kind of small.
Sean, I don't know. I mean, you got to hope that these elections are fluid and that we get the race, the contest that the country needs. Because if this starts to become a coronation of Mark Carney, and the polls this week again show more momentum as the week is ending for the Carney Liberals, opening up their lead over the Conservatives, pushing now on some polls into the low and mid 40s. You know, what does the Conservative Party do? I mean, it's been a pretty safe week for the campaign, and I guess you understand that. It is the first week of the campaign for the Conservatives, so maybe they felt that they had to go through some motions here. But I just don't see top-ups on the TFSA or, a lower total, tax on the bottom, the bottom quintile as doing anything approaching blunting what, looks like less than a week into this campaign to be a liberal juggernaut.
Yeah, yeah. It's moments like these where you have to take risks. Risks come with trade-offs, but so does sitting tight. If I was on the conservative campaign team, I would be spending the weekend thinking about ideas that can draw clear contrasts with Mark Carney Liberals. What are policy proposals that will resonate with the population, but Mark Carney can't match? Because I think this is an important point. Up until now, Mark Carney and the Liberals have sought to essentially match the conservative policy for policy in order to, for all intents and purposes, take policy off the table, to make this really about leadership. And so they need to make it as hard as possible for Mr. Carney and the Liberals to match them on criminal justice reform, on corporate tax cuts, on national security. These are the areas where because of liberal coalitional dynamics, Mark Carney's unlikely to follow the Conservatives, and where I think that they need to roll the dice, because, as you say, if they continue to play it safe, it seems hard to see a scenario where they can come out on top.
Yeah, and all next week is going to be Tariff Week. So it'll be April 2nd. It's going to be all about the issue set that, again, feeds into the Carney campaign and where they're polling the strongest in terms of competency, supposedly, to deal with the Trump threat. Sean, I don't want to lose my SHIT on day 5 of the campaign, but wow, I got to say, it is amazing how an entire decade of liberal government that basically screwed up multiple important national files, from the economy to immigration, arguably to Canada's place in the world, to many of the very things that set Canada up for this unfortunately weak position to be in vis-a-vis the emergence of the Trump threat. All of that, Sean, just seemingly in these public opinion polls, deleted, gone, vaporized, obliviated. What the heck? How does this happen? How do you just have a do-over after, basically, burning the house half down?
Yeah, Roger, we were talking about our age earlier. Remember the Will Smith film Men in Black, where they had those devices that would cause you to completely wipe your memory? This is like the Men in Black election campaigin.
We got the title for the show, Sean. We got the title for the show. Thank you.
Even this week, we had former Immigration Minister Sean Fraser, who I would argue had the worst record of any cabinet minister in my lifetime. He is someone who assumed responsibility for Canada's world-leading immigration system and left with the system in tatters, went from resigning to spend time with his family to re-upping as a candidate, which I think reflects in a way, as you say, that this kind of amnesia, this Trump-induced amnesia that has taken over the electorate. Uh, One idea I wanted to put on the table here, Rudyard, and get your reaction, because I think it's self-evident, as we've been discussing, that in the face of these poll numbers and now Donald Trump's affirmation of Mark Carney, the conservatives need to do something different. And what would you say to the argument, something we talked about earlier in the week, that it has to a shift from this emphasis on the leader to a focus on the team? That is to say, Canadians aren't just choosing Mark Carney versus Pierre Poilievre. They're choosing which team, which government is ready to step in and assume responsibility for governing. And I think the Conservatives have a lot of bench strength. Incumbent MPs like Michael Chong and Adam Chambers and Rachel Danko, candidates like Ellis Ross in British Columbia. Is now the time, in a way, Rudyard, to elevate the team and make the case that pound for pound, whatever one thinks about the leaders, the Conservatives are best placed to lead the country?
Look, I think it's like trench warfare. The enemy has overrun your front lines. You've been pushed back into your reserve trench, and you're going to field whoever you can field, I guess, at this point. But Sean, I think to break through and to go into the next leg of this campaign relying on secondary surrogates, I just don't see that meeting the moment. And just to be a little bit critical here, like, part of the challenge is that there may be the reason for that amnesia, the Men in Black zapper, Sean, is because, frankly, this isn't a country anymore that's particularly interested, I think, in accountability. We let this Liberal government off the hook multiple times, the SNC-Lavalin scandal. I can go through the foreign interference scandal and on and on and on. And we just don't really do accountability anymore in Canada, if we want to be honest about it. And in some ways, if Carney, especially if he goes on to a majority win in this election, will be a sign that Canadians themselves aren't maybe too keen on accountability, not just for their leaders, but for themselves. It's about a kind of culture of permission and permissiveness to basically do what you're going to do, and oh yeah, I guess you made the best effort. That was a nice try. Thanks for showing up. It's important to play the game. You're on the field. All the platitudes, Sean. It's just there's something to me that's shocking in our political culture that we could just, again, not hold a party to account. And this is not a partisan statement. I'm not a member of the Conservative Party of Canada. I do not vote in elections in my role as the hub. I think it's important for us to remain a bit removed from this. But, our system, our Westminster system, one of the nice features about it historically has been that people and governments go into the penalty box after they screw things up. It may be 4 years, it may be 8, but they go into that penalty box because it allows a new party with a new outlook and new people to come into power and to sweep out the old. So now Canadians, seriously, if you look at these polls, are by all intents happy to proceed to award the Liberals a majority, Sean, on the basis of a disastrous final 5 years of the Trudeau government, and to have this party, in a sense, become the perpetual governing party. Because if they win a majority, history would show that's not 4 years, that's 8 years. So you're talking about a quarter century of Liberal rule. Sean, I don't know. I mean, that's a departure in Canada. It's a departure from our history. It's a departure from our best traditions. And while changing up, who's in front of the cameras in the campaign, to me, that's just all tactics. And it doesn't get to something that is off, something that is wrong in our political culture and maybe it's post-COVID fallout. People just don't want to be accountable. They don't want to hold other people to account. And I think a certain portion of the electorate don't want to be held to account themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. Well said, Richard. I think there's a lot to it. The the strength of democracy, of course, is it's inherently self-correcting, or at least it ought to be. And as you say, the public gets an opportunity every 4 years to communicate to elected officials how they feel about their record, their performance, and then that gives that market signal is important. It causes parties to reevaluate themselves, make changes, make adjustments. I think, for instance, that a lot of the biggest changes in our politics over the past 100 years have happened as parties have been out of power. I think, for instance, of the famous Kingston Conference in 1960, which set the stage for the Pearson government and Trudeau government in the 60s and the 70s. I think about in the lead up to the 1984 election, the Progressive Conservative Party shedding some of the kind of milquetoast mixed economy statism of the Stanfield years and adopting a more market-oriented politics or market-oriented policy agenda reflected in, amongst other things, of course, free trade. And so if that signal is broken, Rudyard, if the public, as you say, is prepared to accept huge failures on immigration, economic and fiscal policy, and other areas,
National
what
security.
what does that convey to the Liberal Party? What does it convey to the government? In a way, it breaks that relationship of accountability. And I would just say, if you'll permit me, it also, I think, sends the wrong signal to the Conservatives, incidentally. If the Conservatives lose this election, the party is going to subject itself to a series of identity questions, and I worry a lot about. I would worry a lot about that process. That they risk learning the wrong lessons. Just this week we have Corey Tenike, the campaign manager for Doug Ford over the past few election cycles, criticizing Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives, in effect, calling on them to be more like Doug Ford and the Ontario Progressive Conservatives, and I just can't think of a worse outcome. Yes, Doug Ford has now won 3 successive elections, but surely, Roger, winning elections isn't an end in itself. It's a means to an end. And I think if you were looking dispassionately at Doug Ford's record over the past several years, you wouldn't reach the conclusion it's conservative. The government is bigger, deficit is larger,
Taxes are higher.
The education curriculum is as woke as it ever was. The failure to reform the healthcare system means it's collapsing across the province. The list goes on and on. So that's a long way of saying, if the outcome of this election is indeed a majority Liberal government, as you say, I think there's a risk that both the Liberals and the Conservatives learn the wrong lessons from such an outcome.
Yeah, well said. Let's end this show, Sean, just to bring our community, and we'll release this podcast because we are during the election today, this week's roundtable, to all of our members and subscribers. So we hope that all of you had a chance to look at an op-ed that Sean and I wrote today in the Hub on the latest media subsidy scandal. We think it's a scandal that's happening during this election. We now have checks that are arriving for something called The Collective. I love these Orwellian names.
It's like from an Ayn Rand. It's like from an Ayn Rand book, isn't it?
You keep drinking that water, buddy. I can tell you need it after last night. So the Collective is sending checks to media organizations across Canada. This is the Google money that Google was basically shaken down to pay in order to allow them to continue to have news on their platform. It's called the Online News Act, or Bill C-18. The Hub received its payment, $22,000 this week, and in defense and to assert our editorial independence, We have, as we reported in the paper today, we've donated this money immediately to March of Dimes Canada. And Sean, I'd like you to explain why we did that and why, in a sense, these subsidies aren't just a blight on the independence of a free press in Canada. They are a burden that other groups are having to shoulder, groups who should not be, in a sense, sharing public largesse when their needs are so urgent compared to those of, a dying legacy media that needs, frankly, to reinvent itself.
Yeah. Well, first of all, this is an initiative that you've led at the Hub, and so congratulations and thank you for showing leadership on this. As you say, we were eligible for our share of this funding being administered by the Canadian Journalism Collective, and we made the decision that we wouldn't accept the funding, that we would donate it. But the reason we were public about it, Roger, I think is important to emphasize. We decided to go public about this because on March 11th, just a week or so before the launch of the federal election campaign, the Journalism Collective started dispersing payments to eligible news outlets, and it's going to continue to do so over the coming weeks. It will not, according to the collective's website, release the full list of recipients and their funding levels until 30 days after the dispersals are complete. That means we aren't going to know which news outlets receive funding and how much until after this election campaign. It's notable, I should say in parentheses, that there's been essentially no reporting on the fact that these dispersals are now happening. And so if anything, we hope that we draw attention to this and that audiences compel the news organizations that they're reading and listening to come out clearly about whether they're receiving funding and how much. On the broader point, though, about why we chose March of Dimes Canada, which of course does tremendous work to support the needs and interests of persons with disabilities. It's important to emphasize that in a world of scarcity, public expenditures are a bit zero sum. So the government of Canada is spending hundreds of millions of dollars each year on subsidies to private news outlets through, amongst other things, the journalism labor tax credit. Those are necessarily resources, Roger, that aren't going to other causes. In the last budget, the Trudeau government nickel and dimed persons with disabilities in the form of a significantly underfunded Canadian disability benefit. We think that a much better use of those scarce public dollars would go not to Post Media and the Globe and Mail and the Toronto Star and others. It would be going to Canadians with disabilities who face real needs. And so, we're doing our little part here by providing that $22,000 to the March of Dimes Canada so that they can do the tremendous work that they do, helping people in need as opposed to private news organizations.
Yeah. And just my final point here is the reason this really matters is that the Liberals' principal opponents in this election, the Conservatives, have indicated previously that they would scrap Bill C-18, that they would substantially rework the current subsidy regime, change the metrics on which it is based. So, let's be clear what's happening here. Large checks for large media organizations, they're most likely in the millions of dollars, are arriving in their bank accounts to cover an election where the parties whose policies have created these checks and their convenient arrival in those news organizations' bank accounts is effectively arguing for the continuation of the status quo where their principal opponents are not. This is not to say that the Globe and Mail or Post Media and the National Post are going to be biased because of these checks in their coverage. We think more highly of our colleagues than that in those other organizations. But we're making the point that this is material to the election itself. This is a live issue that is being debated between the two principal parties who are contesting for this election. So if you are receiving the money and I say this to all my good friends at the National Post and elsewhere who I know listen to this podcast, if your owners are receiving this money as a matter of simple journalistic standards, because this is part of the election and it is a live election issue, you need to disclose this. You need to disclose how much money you received. And if you wish, you might want to disclose how and what steps you're going to take to ensure your editorial independence during the campaign. We felt that we needed to take the step of donating this money, getting it out of our bank account, out of our news organization, and to a worthy cause, in this case, the March of Dimes. We don't expect other groups necessarily to do that. That's our choice. But they have not a choice, but a necessity, Sean, to disclose now during the campaign how much money they have received from the incumbent government as a result of its policies during a live election. This is simple journalistic standard and practice, not even best practice, Sean.
Yeah. I could go on about this, of course. And maybe I shouldn't. But what's interesting, Roger, is that this funding, of course, was legislatively mandated on Google, who then subsequently entered into this arrangement with the Canadian Journalism Collective. But it's the source of the $100 million. The Hub is in the midst of a sponsorship with Google, which we're proud of. We're writing a series of articles about artificial intelligence as a technology, how it can support higher productivity in the economy, as well as within the public service. And our audience, Roger, will know when they see and read those articles because we disclose that they are supported by Google. So this is not about whether or not organizations in the name of financing their operations enter into partnerships with private entities or others. It really is about one, this is an indirect subsidy in the sense that Google is not doing this on a market basis. It's doing it because Ottawa made it do it. And secondly, as you say, the organizations that are receiving this funding up until this point have not disclosed it to their audience. We think we're doing it different and better, and we think there's an onus on others in the industry to do the same, because ultimately we're all collectively invested, Roger, in the trust and confidence of the Canadian public in journalism.
Yeah, such a good point. And great point about Google. And yeah, we have lots of advertisers. We love our advertisers because they come to us voluntarily, Sean. They come to us because they feel that we've created a platform and assembled an audience which is attractive to them. So we enter into a voluntary agreement to work together to do X, Y, or Z. And we disclose that, as you say, on our platform. This is totally different. This was Google being, in a sense, told by the government, you can't have news in Canada on your platform unless you comply with this act and provide $100 million a year adjusted to inflation. It was a shakedown. Let's be honest about what it was. It was a sop to a media lobby that has fundamentally misconstrued the relationship between the press, which they all know is a beneficial one vis-a-vis the platforms who bring untold eyeballs to their content. And Meta, as we know, because of C18, took news off its platform, causing major losses to the Hub and to other organizations because they decided not to comply with Ottawa's forced kind of coercion. Its second backdoor bailout of the mainstream press. So, Sean, sorry, I get vexed about this, but I'm just happy to see that the good folks at the March of Dimes will be the beneficiary of lousy public policy. And again, I just say to our friends in the media, I know you listen to this podcast, you keep the money, spend it on yourselves, have your employers take it as profit to give back to their investors. I don't care. What I do care about is that you disclose it. You disclose the amount when you received it, because we are in an election, and this is a live election issue where the two leading parties have sharply different views on subsidies and on this specific act, Bill C-18, the Online News Act. Sean, I'll stop it there. I want you to get a few more glasses of water in you to make up for your big birthday night last night. And then I'm ordering you to have a nap this afternoon, a long nap. I'm going to say to the staff, no calls, no emails for Sean between, let me see, I'll give you 45 minutes between 3 p.m. Eastern and 4.
Thanks, buddy. And thanks to our listeners. It's been a fun week, hasn't it, Roger? We launched the new show, of course, the daily show to track the election. We've sought to bring both political and policy analysis, and we've been overwhelmed by the reaction from our audience, and we've had a lot of fun doing it.
Yeah.
And we'll charge up over the next couple of days and be back with everyone first thing Monday morning.
We sure will. Okay, be well, everybody. Thank you all for tuning into the Roundtable, and please do check out our daily election show on YouTube. It's live 10 a.m. Monday to Friday, on demand anytime, and also as a podcast on this same main podcast feed for The Hub. We'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.